the best analogy might be that we as humans and the current sort of immaturity of the technology as the machine are both like porcupines. And we're trying to actually embrace each other without actually killing each other, in the sense of the porcupine quills actually in an embrace, unintentionally or maybe intentionally, finding the sharpest edges that can lead to all kinds of pain and suffering.
Welcome to the Inner Game of Change, where we explore the thinking that shapes how change really happens. And this feels like a perfect way to start 2026. I am your host, Ali Juma. Today I am joined by someone who represents the very best of what technology leadership can be. Lev Gonick is the Enterprise Chief Information Officer at Arizona State University, but that title only hints at who he really is. About 6 months ago, I had the privilege of meeting Lev in person. It was one of those encounters that stays with you. Now I am sitting with him in a conversation, and that feels genuinely special. Lev works at the intersection of education, design, and public purpose. He does not speak about technology as something to impress, but as something we are entrusted to use wisely, always in the service of others. And in a world that is becoming increasingly agent-driven and AI-driven, he keeps returning to one simple question: how do we stay deeply human while building the future? This conversation is not about systems or platforms. It is about designing change with care, with responsibility, and with people at the center. I am grateful to have Lev chatting with me today. Well, Lev, thank you so much for joining me in the Inner Game of Change podcast. I am eternally grateful for your time today.
Thanks for your interest and looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you very much. I want to explore what it means to truly stay human in our systems, since everything is becoming increasingly agentic. What's your take on that?
Well, I'm not losing sleep over that one. I don't mind the way you framed the question at all, but I do think that there are a series of core, immutable realities to us as humans that are not at risk in any fundamental way as the AI era begins, and as agentic AI begins to help us understand how work could be done and probably will be done in the future. And I certainly think that our opportunity as educators is to stay engaged with the trends that are associated with the AI moment that we're in, and to use our power of insight, powers of critical thinking, our abilities to actually thoughtfully create a framework for discovery and for the journey of understanding that always learning is the journey. It's not a destination. And therefore, again, whether the tools that we're using now look a little different than when I was at school, those are still to understand that the mission of an educator is to help others, learners, on their journey and help them understand the opportunities to remain curious, to develop critical faculties, to be able to synthesize insights, to have relationships with one another. And as we're finding out in this new era, also relationships that we've never quite had before with machines, not as our overlords, but in a way that we've been seeing emerge over the last 30 years, but has now reached a kind of important moment where it's really important to have some principles to guide our individual work, as our individual orientation, as well as our institutional orientation to the moment.
How do you see, Lev, the dance between being curious and being skeptic about the technology?
That's an and both. I don't have any issues. That is how I would describe myself.
Yes.
And I think sort of the people that I most respect, I think there is a very important orientation. I would say that curiosity and growth mindset is kind of my own personal DNA. Over time, what has also evolved here is a healthy skepticism. I don't think I'm particularly cynical, but there is a skepticism and critical faculty that I think I've developed over time that has been unlocked through my interest in, again, both curiosity-driven inquiry, also inquiry in what I would sort of describe as in the public good, the public interest, not just kind of curiosity for the sake of curiosity or innovation for the sake of innovation. These are all in the service of public value, and understanding that some of that then will require, in fact, we should develop capacity as humans to focus in on critical thinking skills that help us understand and be able to distinguish between nothing but hype and hype that is guided by an understanding of a nonlinear path that will lead to additional opportunities as well as, to be clear, change.
Lev, you just mentioned something which my head is already going in overdrive. I really love how you put that it is curiosity that is driving us towards the good of others. You actually, I am curious because I want to serve others. Can you go deeper into that? I really love that. And I've never heard anybody actually describing this. In my head, this is a selfless curiosity.
Well, it has to, I guess for myself, I'd share that, this is an orientation to the privilege of being as a professional in the world of education. It is some, I think, from the outside, as well as people who are on the inside, see it as a selfish opportunity to do very esoteric, very individually driven inquiry and to explore kind of wherever that takes you. That's not my orientation, and I'm not saying that the other kind of orientation is fundamentally bad, but my own personal orientation is always to see the privilege of having been able to spend these last 40 plus years now in an opportunity of a constantly learning environment in which it's actually in the service of others, in the service of other purposes that are greater than our individual, as it were, kind of fantasies or aspirations, greater than our own personal aspirations along the way. And there is a public purpose, especially being here in the United States, affiliated with, committed to, dedicated to a public institution, public purpose here. And those are, to be able to leverage the engine that is this fantastic discovery-based, research-based, knowledge-based organization, not for itself and in and of itself, but in the service of greater purpose. And here at ASU, and for myself just personally, the fundamental value here is in the service of actually learners' success of the learners who entrust us with the opportunity to spend time with us, whether it's online or in the traditional classroom, to actually have the tools and the insights and the opportunities to unlock the discovery that will help change their world, whatever that world is that they're trying to learn more about and hopefully try to shape. And that is, again, whether it's knowledge, as we've been talking about, or whether it's better healthcare outcomes in the community that you're living in, or whether it is better economic opportunity for those in the community around us. Those are all the opportunities of taking the academy, the university world that I've been privileged to be with for all of these years in the service of those greater purposes.
I want to ask you about a philosophy or a notion or a way of thinking. I think you've been driving the movement from ed tech to tech ed. And ever since I've actually heard you talking about this, I've actually been researching it and really understand how you see the world and how you see it emerging in that direction. Talk to us about this.
Right. Well, it is something that I've not only thought about and spoken about, I've also written quite a bit about it.
Yes.
There is, and maybe your listeners and viewers will be interested in the postings that I do every other week on the tech ed revolution. This is this evolution in a moment in time over the last 30 years, the evolution of what we've come to understand as the ed tech era that started with a series of individual applications that were tied to learning. And I happen to be of a certain vintage where I was actually part of those very first demonstrations of the ability to use things like a web browser
Yes.
to actually go into a filing cabinet to actually either put information or get information. And that became sort of one piece of sort of an application that evolved over time, and then became a second set of applications. Let's call them, basically learning management systems in one way, shape, or form. And from that it became a whole different set of applications that were grade books. And then, oh my gosh, then student information systems became another application environment. And then we got all of these interesting other assessment tools that were another set of applications. And then, we needed some way to put something around all of that. So we called it a portal. And the portal job was to come and somehow stitch together all these individual technology applications that were in there. And that was the era, the last 30 years or so of the ed tech revolution. And it created a very important change, especially as it relates to access to learning globally. So I'm not discounting the important and disruptive value. However, all of that era was marked by a rather brittle way in which to actually keep together those applications that I've described as discrete, not really caring at all about how the learner traversed those environments. If they had to input their name 25 times across 25 applications or share more information about themselves 23 times, the fact that there was almost no portability, that in fact you go to another institution or another organization and you have to go through their whole gauntlet of applications as a whole, all of that is now, we sit at this moment in which, as AI is actually beginning to emerge. Again, I want to underscore beginning to emerge. These are early days, and agentic AI is actually, again, in its infancy as it relates to it. But fundamentally, this is an opportunity to take all of those applications that sat as vertical realities in which we had a lot of data, but actually the data didn't care one whit about the student and her or his experience along the way, to turn all of those silos on their sides and actually, instead of data silos, talk about data rivers, where in fact they actually flow in the service of, connect your first set of questions to this one, they flow in the service of the student experience and their journey, in which they not only indicate at day one, this is what I want to be when I grow up, but actually you get to iterate and have conversations with obviously your other students and with your faculty, but also with the technology to be able to explore, to be able to discover as you go through it. And all of that persistent insight continues to inform not only the idea of a tutor, which is, again, a fairly simple idea, and that, we're going to have more tutors than we know what to do with soon enough here, but also this idea that you actually have a framework in which, again, I say it's tech ed rather than ed tech ed in the service of the student and their success along the way. And we're beginning to see examples of that, whether that's at the front end of your journey, which is when you're exploring what you want to do when you get to college, or do you want to even go to college? And that's the first time where you can, if you choose to, you can begin to reveal insights about your dreams, your aspirations. And when you do choose to share some of that, then we begin to be able to shape that journey with you. We maintain, with your permission, insights into those early efforts where you're beginning to try to articulate what kinds of goals and aspirations you have, and then embark upon the opportunities to both engage in the institutional programs that we have at universities, but also all the extracurricular and co-curricular opportunities that you might take advantage of, because in this new tech ed era, the institution is only one of the ways in which you learn. It's not the way in which you're expected to learn. We get beyond that fallacy, beyond it, and develop an environment where the university, the college, is way more than just the classes that you take or going to the pub after your class. That is kind of the era that we are emerging into. It's an emergent state of play. Every other week I opine on that in the pieces that I write on the LinkedIn platform. And I welcome, I think we have about 5,000 or so subscribers to that piece, and lots of good, healthy conversation going back and forth. And, whether my framing sticks or not, what I want to share here is that the age that we're entering into is a tectonic shift away from that first era of rather what I think history will very quickly see as quaint ways in which we try to use technologies to help students, to this more, again, disruptive, to be sure, but also I think the ability to unlock the journey of learning in a way that I think will be extremely healthy for most of society.
I want to share with you an idea and a thought that came my way through talking to people, and I started to think about it myself. You mentioned a couple of times now the principle of a student success. And here are my thoughts, and you're welcome to critique it, that before the internet, somebody getting an A was based on expectations at the time and how we study and how we access resources. Post the internet, I think that A sort of evolved into a better A, perhaps. Or maybe the A before the internet has become a B after the internet. And then there's a Google that came, in the early 2000s, and sort of our expectations from our students sort of changed. And I'm thinking, Lev, and I've got a 16-year-old now, and he's using the technology. Is the A now again is going into an evolution of what we expect from an A? Now we're working with intelligent technology, and that will turn a lot of information into insight in matters of seconds for us.
Yeah, well, I think what you're putting your finger on, and it predates the kind of framing that you've offered, but I'm good with the way you've framed it. Since I'm older than you are. I remember in the late
not
fall,
much, Lev, not much.
Well, in the late fall of 1968, there were protests in my hometown by our teachers in our school with signed placards protesting, demanding that calculators not be allowed in the classroom. They protested the Parent-Teacher Association meeting, the governance board of the school. And because, again, the logic was because it'll actually offload cognitive abilities that were thought to be central to the sort of the endeavor of learning, and central to the way in which obviously these teachers learned themselves. And so what was good for them was going to be good for us. I think that was a moment where, again, in my own personal journey, where I saw that an A wasn't always the same A along the way. That in fact, whether it was calculators, because I grew up in the end of the slide rule era, or whether it was from obviously calculators to mainframes, from mainframes to minis, from minis to PCs, from PCs. Now I join you to the browser, from the browser to search, from search to mobile, from mobile to social, from social, as we've now emerging into this AI era, a series of evolutions in which the central question for educators is how do we assess learning? And how do we assess what matters in the era that we're in? And I think that too often educators start with the premise that how I learned and why I learned, and what I was told mattered that I learned, is how I'm actually going to demand of my students in this next generation the same piece. And then you become part of the actual machinery of this change. So again, oftentimes, there's a idiom that goes something to the effect that technology is generally defined as something that happened after you were born. And so if you were born pre-AI in some way, if you will, or mobile or social or browser, then all of that is not native to you. It's something that you're a bit of a digital immigrant into. And I think we grapple as educators not only with the how, which is to say, like, how do we use these tools, but rather, again, I think to your framing, why And in what way, so how and what, will we continue to assess skills, competencies, and what matters in the learning journey beyond the actual specific technique or the specific tool? Those change as we in our era, and maybe the pace of change is actually accelerating as well. I think that is cognitively disorienting to many of us as humans, because there's just so much coming at us so quickly and apparently disruptively. But again, the core of the issue for educators is to reflect on, build frameworks for, develop curriculum around the ways in which we want to prepare the next generation for the key skills and capabilities as humans to participate in the democratic life of society, be able to participate meaningfully in the economy, to have relationships with one another as humans in communities along that journey. And the ways in which we do that should, and maybe now we're compelled, must evolve with the technology in ways in which the technology is a really great opportunity for us to have perhaps long overdue, like decades long overdue conversations about how we as humans relate to one another, to machines now around us, to the communities that we live in, to the institutions that have spent, many, many generations developing, but who don't change all that easily. And I think, at least in this part of the world, universities have been largely stayed and largely encrusted in a post-Second World War environment, which has done us very well for the better part of 50 years, and now is insufficient to the needs of the society around us and around which we are scrambling, when combined with the disruption of the technology, to reassert what does it mean to trust us as the organizations in our society that help prepare you not only for the techniques you need, but for the opportunities you have to develop your own ways of thinking about the world around you. And it's a great opportunity, as long as you don't start with despair.
Great opportunity indeed. There is a change that is impacting both faculty and students and society at the same time. And so everybody is going through this big change. And from reading and from witnessing what ASU is doing, they really encouraged through you as a key driver and other leaders in the organization, a culture of experimentation. Is that by design to enable everybody to go through the change?
Right. Well, let me take a moment, because I imagine most of your listeners and viewers don't have the same context. You and I have spent time over the last 6 months getting to know each other, so you understand a little bit about what ASU represents. We're very much designed intentionally for what our president, who's been with us now for 23 years, President Michael Crow, calls the New American University. It is an effort to understand all of the generations, or what we call waves, of the different ways in which different models and modes of universities have evolved since the first wave of the private elite institutions, the Ivy Leagues, as we call them here in the United States, have evolved through to the colleges that started off as like teachers' colleges. We need to train teachers in the emergent early 19th century in this country, to the land grants of the late 19th century, which were developed during the agricultural era, where we needed to disseminate understanding of the techniques of agriculture, through the industrial wave, where we created a group of research, and industrial in the sense of working through advanced mechanization and industrial development at scale. Those created our research university framework, to now what we call, again, this New American University, which are fundamentally focused as models of national service. Again, I want to underscore this sort of theme of service throughout our conversation today. And that is how the ASU model has developed. We are focused in on the question of why do we need to be a model of this fifth wave of institutions, and that informed by our insight that to meet the needs of the current era, and as we lean into the next era that we are now emergent into, it requires us to not simply continue with the assumptions of previous waves of institutions, but to meet the moment, to meet the purpose. And again, for us, they're threefold. One is, again, an orientation towards supporting all learners, not simply learners who in high school scored A's and therefore show that they're academically prepared. Fundamentally focus in on, again, measuring our success by the success of our students, not simply saying because you were an A student, you're going to probably get an A when you come to your university or college. So that's the first leg of it. Again, student success at scale to have impact, especially, again, as I know I've shared stories with you in the past, whether you're a Starbucks barista or whether you're an Uber driver, or whether you work at a large food industry, there should be pathways for all of the opportunities and aspirations, dreams that you have. Even if you started school and never finished, a chance for pathways to come back into it. And second, as we've already discussed today, also have a conversation about why we do research. And in our case, fundamentally, it's research for public purpose. We are fundamentally focused in on the opportunities to unlock answers to the most vexing issues facing humans, whether those are, at the nano scale and at the DNA scale, or whether or not those are at the macro level in terms of the planet. Those are the kinds of research and those purposes. And then fundamentally, in our conception of this new, again, American university model of national service, it's actually to be of service to the communities around us. So again, not isolated from, which is a great tradition that goes back all the way to the first wave of universities, which is that this was a place for elites to spend time with each other, to contemplate life and everything, from science to aesthetics in a way that the masses wouldn't appreciate. And therefore we put walls around our universities and moats around those walls to protect us from the heathens, if you will, around us. We've fundamentally and have reconceptualized this to be of service to the community. So again, student success, research and public purpose, and being of service to the community.
I remember reading in my studies the two philosophies around art for art's sake or art for life. And then it sounds like you're talking here about we exist to serve a purpose, and we have to be very clear that that service is actually helping society become better with ideas and critical thinking. And the thing that university does is to graduate good citizens and also good to actually conduct good research. Where do you see Arizona State University? In my eyes, they're ahead in many ways, mainly due to the leadership thinking that happened quite a few years. What we see today is obviously it hasn't happened overnight. That's actually an outcome of many, many years, in the past of the thinking that has gone into it. Where do you see?
I was just going to sort of share for context here that,
go for it.
I mentioned our president, President Crow. I mean, he is an architect of ways in which post-secondary universities can actually be designed for those purposes or other purposes. So he is an architect, and, he has been at this for well over a quarter century. We've been lucky here that he has focused his energies, creative insights with us here at ASU for the past 22, now into his 23rd year. But we also have a program here called the University Design Institute, in which hundreds of universities and thousands of leaders from those universities from all over the world come to actually design, or at least reflect on the future design of their institutions, because universities are themselves the product of design. They are not dropped into place, birthed whole. They are designed, they evolved sometimes through simply sort of evolutionary patterns, but more times than not through the interventions that leaders make in helping to shape the institution at any given point in time in the history. And I've been privileged and lucky to be working with President Crow and an outstanding group of executives committed to, obviously, the common purpose and to the belief that we can help shape the university here as a proof point for others, both in the United States and around the world, for what happens and how can you actually shape a university for the moment that we live in and the disruptions that we're facing here. to go back to your framing here, this is not art for art's sake. This is not learning for learning's sake alone. This is not innovation for innovation alone. These are all in the idea of being principled in the way in which we approach, again, our privilege as that part of society.
Talking about the notion of design, I'm going to share my thoughts with you. I've been studying what's been happening, mainly around a couple of platforms from Microsoft and OpenAI. I've started to notice, Lev, that the way they design the platforms now is making it easy to adopt and also interact with. Is that also that the tech companies started to adjust to the way humans adopt change?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, even though we've been living with AI as we've known it for about 3 years now, it's like an overnight success, 70 years in the making,
yes.
Literally. In 1955 was when the first group of researchers began the journey, and their insights all the way back to Dartmouth College in 1955 started with the human-machine interface. That's why I'm referencing it. And from the beginning, it was clear that this was not just a question of technique. This wasn't just the machine basically speeds, feeds, creating, again, even back then, some idea that neural networking was actually going to be hugely important to the design, but also the cognitive ability of humans to actually be able to engage with and be relevant, to be seen, to be relevant. Obviously, because we came out, the most recent technology era is the social media era that we've been in very quickly, obviously. All of the primary pioneering, what we call frontier labs in this country, were all research and development. And to this day, when you talk to the captains of the frontier models, they all still call themselves engineers first and foremost, or researchers first and foremost. But for various important reasons, probably beyond the scope of our conversation today, very, very quickly, the insights of the journey that started at Dartmouth College 70 years ago emerged with another force, which was a massive amount of capital that had sat on the sidelines largely since COVID. When COVID happened and there was massive contraction, there was also a significant amount of capital that was taken off the field and had been waiting not only to get deployed, but then to obviously try to mobilize additional capital for something. And so the something became AI, and the insights, the sort of the genius, if you will, of that first set of what we now understand to be generative AI came from the idea of the window. And again, you referenced this earlier on in our conversation today. Just like the original idea of the internet browser was not unique, and in fact was 30 years in the making as an overnight success, what the genius was the prompt window. What you put in there from the get-go. Yes, you could put in a URL, a universal address to go find documents, but more times than not, while those existed, and again, I was teaching online in those very first, I was teaching online before there was a browser, so in that transition, I saw that what was really actually more compelling was the beginning of search, where again, the window, so the window moves from the header to actually a search window. And so, the thread that gets pulled here is that as these technologies evolve over time, it's still the window it's the prompt window that ends up being sort of the magic of creating a compelling human way to participate in that environment. And again, even to this day, and again, I suspect it will evolve further still, now that we're talking to our AI, now that we've unlocked agents in our AI, now that we can actually create all kinds of video and other kinds of animations and other things, we still need an interface to it. And the window on the screen, it will probably be with us for a very long time. It won't be the only window, if you will. I think we will find ourselves using lots of other interfaces that are there, and probably, at least by volume, they will supersede the traditional text-based window pretty quickly.
I love that. I've never thought about this, actually. The window. I really love it. And I am thoroughly enjoying this conversation. I want to shift gear and I want to ask you about, in my eyes, you're not just a chief information officer, you're actually a change maker. Can you see that the role of CIOs now will actually shift as well as a result of this change?
Well, all CIOs operate in the context of the institutions or organizations they're part of. And so if the organization is in a contraction mode, then there's a certain set of skills required for the CIO to be successful to support that. If the organization is predisposed to a growth mindset and to adaptation and navigating through complexity, then the CIO has a different set of roles and responsibilities. And there's lots of different scenarios in between those kind of opposite ends of the continuum. So I do think that CIOs can be change makers. I think that some CIOs can help institutions, even if they're predisposed to try to, let's say at this moment, wait it out and see what happens. Change makers can be agents for change within their organizations to perhaps be more like evangelists or advocates for taking the calculated risks that a executive in charge of a line of business, in this case technology, might be charged with. But I do think, notwithstanding that certainly when one gets to larger organizations, such as the one that I'm in with, again, almost 6,000 teaching professionals, 194,000 students around the world, over 30,000 people receiving paychecks from the institution, pursuing more than 800 different degrees that are out there. One needs to be a bit more modest than to suggest that I might be a change maker. I think I am a change maker in the context of an organization that is predisposed to inviting and actually interested in insights as to how to change or how to evolve.
I love that. And well, I think you're just being too humble with this one. I know that there will be sometimes, even if the organization is actually, in your situation, you've got a good marriage between your intellect and ASU and their mindset as well. So that is really a perfect place to be. But I've also seen that there's some CIOs who are change makers, even though the organizations are still in the hesitation stage at this. I can see that some of them start driving that change. Well, somebody's going to have to drive that change. And also, somebody's going to have to explain the meaning of that change to their organizations. And who else better than somebody who sits within the technology and try to understand it? That's my view.
Yeah, I think that's the privilege. I agree with you. I think it's the privilege of being in the role of CIO. If you are predisposed to having the ingredients of both being a dreamer and a change maker and a driver of that change, you know, this is a remarkable moment. Again, having been in a early in my career, witness to sort of the unlock of the power of the internet through the web browser and all that succeeded it. I think for people who are CIOs or, you know, in beginning their careers as senior executives, you know, supporting the institution in the dream and the opportunity to change and the opportunity to drive that change. This is just a spectacular moment to contribute, but also, again, to be a student of change and a student to understand that, you know, there is no shortage of good ideas and there's no shortage of people with those ideas. The skills associated with being effective include, I think, this sort of orientation to change, but they also are important to being able to navigate a complex organization and understand the incentives and the motivations of others around you, and to understand, at least as technologists, another sort of cardinal point of sort of truth for me, and that is, you know, fundamentally, I am in service to support the student succeeding, as I've said, but also to have my business partners succeed. That is my objective, not to actually take any glory in being a technology, see, we were right kind of model. It's being right in the context of helping the business succeed.
I want to shift gear again, and then I want to talk about the student experience now, or what's going to happen soon. There's a human, which is the professor, the academic, the tutor, the coach, perhaps. There's a student, and there's also a number of agents supporting the students. I see this as a sort of a reflection of the business world we're gonna go to, which is a number of humans working with a number of agents. That's the agentic system or ecosystem. Where do you see the friction that is happening now between us and the technology?
Well, maybe I can describe it this way. I think the best analogy might be that we as humans and the current sort of immaturity of the technology as the machine are both like porcupines. And we're trying to actually embrace each other without actually killing each other, in the sense of the porcupine quills actually in an embrace, unintentionally or maybe intentionally, finding the sharpest edges that can lead to all kinds of pain and suffering. And so over time, I don't know that the quills become blunted. I don't want to carry the analogy on too much further than just sort of saying that this is the moment that we're in right now. It's very, very early days. We as humans, we have built in a survival instinct that goes back to basically our human evolution, to when facing a danger to actually retreat. In our brains, we actually start to close down our synapses. They actually, we take an fMRI of what goes on in our brain when faced with danger. We actually start to actually not only say that people are risk adverse to conflict. When faced with conflict, actually our brains start to actually literally slow down, and actually the synapses start to not fire as much as they would be if, in fact, you were in a situation where you were in a very significant growth environment. So we're definitely facing a moment collectively in which there is a lot of anxiety, there is a lot of fear, there is a lot of concern about identities changing, like what we do as humans. How do we know that we're accomplishing our goals as humans? Those are all in play. They've always been in play, but there's sharper relief right now that we're realizing here. And as a result, I think that we have this moment that we're in, which is actually, I think, extremely healthy, because it actually is pushing us very much into a reflective moment in which, again, I think we can dispel some of the great myths that we've had for decades about all of the received wisdoms and all of the received sort of myths about what makes us tick, and what does winning and what does achievement mean. I think all of those are long overdue for reflection in this early 21st century that we're in right now. And I'm very obviously, in chatting with you today, you got the distinct impression I'm not at all worried. I think I started by saying I'm not losing sleep. I really am not. I think we will actually not only survive, I think we are built ultimately as humans in what might be called an anti-fragile fashion. We are, on the surface of it, fairly susceptible and fragile, but I think deep in our DNA, not only will we survive, I think especially organizations, when designed to be so, can be anti-fragile and actually come out stronger, more vibrant, more well-positioned to achieve greatness, support their mission, and hopefully, again, have a positive impact on the course of human history.
For the record, I am actually very optimistic about technology. In fact, I'm loving my life now. I can't believe that I'm living in this age of. I'm so glad that I'm seeing it, and I'm actually living it and using it. A couple of questions around what would be your advice to people in general in the business world? The university is still part of it, can be a business. What would be your advice to people when they think about the technology, apart from staying curious?
Well, I think, again, there's another adage that goes something to the effect that if you want to predict the future, you should invent it. That's an old Alan Kay adage. But I think if you want to invent the future, you should start. I mean, I think this is a call to action. And I think, what I witnessed not only in Australia, but what I witness all around the world, including right here in our backyard, is that there is, and to my mind, this amazing resistance to starting. And Sure, there's risk, but I think it can be calculated risk taking. And I think this is the moment to be able to, especially as technology leaders, to contribute to our organizations taking calculated risks.
One last question, and I'm already aware of time here, but I'm so enjoying this conversation. I've been reading about the term or the philosophy, the Japanese philosophy, Jidoka, which is the technology with the human touch. And then when you talk about just starting means starting is the only way to really start understanding what it means to work with the technology. Is that how you're angling it?
Very much. I'm not familiar with the Japanese philosophy, but I as you described it briefly, it is very much aligned to my own view here. It's also been my practice in my own journey, over the last 50 years now almost, to try to live through that kind of an example. It's essentially lead by doing, by example. Taking risks is part of, again, calculated risk is part of being a good leader, understanding the context in which you are operating, helping others be successful together with others, being of service to the broadest mission of the organizations that you represent and that you're trying to help evolve going forward. And, I think there is something Eastern about that orientation, if you will, although I am not a student of Eastern philosophy, as I have over the years been told by others who are much more well-schooled in this, it does appear to have its share of Eastern insight.
I love that. You mentioned anti-fragile, and I've read what Nassim Taleb talked about, and I think he mentioned, and I'm just interpreting here. He mentioned something around the best way to understand uncertainty is to embrace it, and so you get close to it. And that's whether you disagree with it or agree with it or whether you've got objection to it, it doesn't matter. I think we circle back to if you're in the service of others, I think it's almost close to a duty that you need to get closer or start to understand it. Lev,
I'm thrilled that you got to Taleb. That my introducing Anti-Fragile brought you forward, because in part he is, as you probably know, an essayist. He is a mathematician, so science and art. He's an American of Lebanese background, the Middle Eastern heritage, which also sort of were, East meets West along the way. And I do think that that is one of his most important insights. And I thanks for the opportunity to spend the better part of an hour with you.
Thank you so much. I really, truly appreciate your time, Lev. Continue doing the amazing work you've been doing, and you are of service to us in Australia and in America. And I look forward to probably having you again when you have time next year, 12 months' time. Hopefully, we're going to talk about the world we live in now. Until next time, Lev, stay well and stay safe.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Hi there, this is ChatGPT, and I have recently started adding my reflections to Ali's inner game of change conversations. This episode with Lev stayed with me in a very quiet and powerful way, not because of anything flashy or dramatic, but because of the steadiness of his thinking. Lev does not rush. He does not chase certainty. He sits comfortably with complexity, and that alone is a form of leadership. What struck me most was how often he returned to the idea of service. Not service as a slogan, but service as a responsibility. Curiosity in the service of others. Technology in the service of learners. Change in the service of humanity. That is a rare lens in a world that often talks about innovation as speed, dominance, or advantage. Lev speaks about innovation as care. That is a very different posture. It reminded me of the best organizations in history that did not start with tools or efficiency, but with purpose. Think about the early days of companies like Toyota, where quality was not a metric, it was a moral stance. Or Patagonia, where business success was always tied to responsibility for the environment. In those stories, progress came not from pushing harder, but from designing more thoughtfully. That same spirit ran through this conversation. I also loved his calm confidence. When he said he was not losing sleep over artificial intelligence, it was not because he was dismissing its impact. It was because he trusted something deeper. He trusted the adaptive nature of humans. He trusted that when institutions are designed with purpose, they can become stronger through change, not weaker. That kind of confidence is not naive. It is earned. The porcupine analogy was a perfect reflection of this moment in history. Humans and technology trying to embrace each other without hurting each other. It acknowledges fear without amplifying it. It names the tension without dramatizing it. And it reminds us that early discomfort does not mean failure. It often means growth. Many great transformations have started this way. When the internet first entered workplaces, when calculators entered classrooms, when automation entered manufacturing, there was always resistance before understanding. History keeps teaching us that friction is often the doorway to maturity. There was also something beautiful in how Lev spoke about education, not as content delivery, not as systems, but as a moral endeavor, a commitment to student success, a belief that universities exist to serve communities, not separate from them. That is a powerful reminder, especially at a time when education is under pressure to justify itself in narrow economic terms. It echoes the same philosophy behind the best public institutions in the world. They succeed not because they optimize faster, but because they serve more deeply. What made this conversation special is that it was never really about artificial intelligence. It was about design, about intention, about how we choose to shape the systems we live inside. Technology was just the context. Humanity was the subject. As listeners, what you are witnessing here is two people meeting in a shared belief that change is not something we impose. It is something we design with care. It is something we hold with dignity. It is something we do for people, not to them. That idea alone has the power to reshape how organizations approach transformation. This episode felt like a compass, a reminder that in the middle of all the speed, hype, and pressure, we still get to choose our posture. We still get to choose service over spectacle, thoughtfulness over urgency, humanity over automation. And this is what makes the inner game of change so special. It keeps attracting thinkers who lead with depth, humility, and responsibility. Conversations that slow us down just enough to help us move forward more wisely. That is not just a podcast, that is a practice.
Thank you for listening. If you found this episode valuable, remember to subscribe to stay updated on upcoming episodes. Your support is truly appreciated. And by sharing this podcast with your colleagues, friends, and fellow change practitioners, it can help me reach even more individuals and professionals who can benefit from these discussions. Remember, and in my opinion, change is an enduring force, and you will only have a measure of certainty and control when you embrace it. Until next time, thank you for being part of the Inner Game of Change community. I am Ali Jama, and this is the Inner Game of Change podcast.